The night was supposed to be perfect. I had been planning my husband's birthday for weeks, making sure every tiny detail was right: the theme, the cake, the music, even his favorite dish that I had spent hours perfecting. I wanted everything to feel special, not for me, but for him. I wanted his family to see how much I cared, how much effort I put into making him feel loved. I decorated the house myself, choosing warm lights and soft tones that made the place feel cozy and alive. Guests started arriving one by one, laughter and chatter filling the air. I greeted everyone with a smile, hiding the exhaustion behind the curve of my lips. My heart felt light, even if my hands were trembling from the rush of preparation. I thought maybe tonight, just maybe, my mother-in-law would see that I wasn't the failure she thought I was. She arrived late, as always, her presence drawing attention the moment she stepped inside. Dressed elegantly, holding a designer purse, she walked as if she owned the place. She gave me a short, cold glance before kissing her son on the cheek and complimenting the decorations, but not to me, to him. I stood there silently, pretending it didn't sting. I tried to focus on the laughter around me, on my husband's smile, on the joy I had created in this house. But deep down, I could already feel that uneasy tension building, that unspoken judgment in her eyes, every time she looked at me. I had learned to live with it, to ignore it, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she seemed to be waiting for the right moment, as if something inside her couldn't bear to see me happy, even for one evening. Dinner was served, the table looked beautiful, and everyone was enjoying the meal. I remember sitting across from her, watching her whisper something to her friend beside her. They both laughed quietly, stealing glances at me. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on refilling glasses, making sure everyone had what they needed. My husband was laughing, telling stories, his face glowing with joy, and I felt proud. I had done everything I could to make him feel celebrated. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Then she stood up. Her voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "You've done well, my son," she said, smiling proudly at him. "You've always been strong, successful, and focused. You deserve the best." Her tone was warm, loving, and everyone smiled at her words. But then her eyes shifted toward me, and her smile changed, sharp, mocking, deliberate. "And yet," she said slowly, pausing just long enough for every ear to turn toward her, "somehow you ended up with a wife who can't even fulfill her role properly. A failed wife, I must say." The room went completely silent. My heart stopped. I could feel every eye turn toward me, every breath in the room heavy with shock. My husband's smile faded as confusion crossed his face. My hands trembled under the table as my chest tightened. The words echoed inside me, burning deep, cutting through every ounce of dignity I had left. A failed wife. The words were cruel, unnecessary, and she said them as if she had been waiting to throw them at me all night. I tried to speak, to say something, but my throat closed up. My lips trembled, and I could barely breathe. I could feel my face flush red, the humiliation rising like fire through my veins. I glanced at my husband, hoping for something, a defense, a word, a gesture, but he just sat there frozen, his mother's words hanging heavy in the air. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. My fingers curled around my napkin, my nails digging into the fabric. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the walls, to escape the suffocating silence that followed her cruel words. People around the table shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze, pretending to sip their drinks or look at their phones. The laughter, the music, the warmth, it all vanished in a single moment, replaced by shame and disbelief. She sat back down with a smug smile, as if she had achieved something, as if breaking me in front of everyone gave her satisfaction. My vision blurred slightly as I tried to hold back tears. I could feel them burning at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay composed. Inside, though, something broke. That night was supposed to be about love, family, and celebration, but she turned it into a scene of humiliation and pain. I stared at the flickering candles on the cake, their soft glow mocking the storm building inside me. I didn't say a word, not then, not there, But in that silence, something inside me changed forever. I sat there frozen, the echo of her words still ringing in my ears. My body felt numb, but inside, everything was trembling. My heart pounded so loudly that it drowned out the quiet whispers spreading around the room. My mother-in-law's smirk lingered in my mind, sharp and cruel, cutting deeper than any insult I had ever endured. Everyone's eyes had already shifted away, pretending to be busy with their food, pretending they hadn't heard, but I knew they had. They all had. And the humiliation felt heavier because of their silence. I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat, refusing to let her see me cry. I couldn't give her that satisfaction. Not tonight. Not in front of everyone. I looked at my husband again. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, and for a second, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. He looked away instead, as if words had failed him. My chest ached. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he stayed silent, why he let her do this to me again and again, but I couldn't. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my breath uneven, my eyes burning with unshed tears. I smiled faintly, pretending to fix my plate, pretending nothing had happened, but my hands shook so badly that the fork slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a soft clang. That tiny sound felt louder than her insult. I quickly bent to pick it up, hiding my face, letting my hair fall forward to shield my tears that finally broke free. I wiped them quickly before anyone could see, took a deep breath, and forced a neutral expression as I sat back up. Every moment after that felt like walking on glass. I kept my gaze low, focused on the tablecloth, pretending to be absorbed in small tasks, pouring water, cutting the cake, handing out slices, anything to keep my mind busy. Every smile I forced felt like it cracked something inside me. I could hear her laughter in the background, loud and confident, like she was proud of what she'd done. I wanted to stand up and leave, to walk out and never look back, but my legs wouldn't move. I felt trapped between pride and pain, between wanting to fight back and wanting to disappear. I clenched my hands in my lap, nails digging into my skin, reminding myself that strength sometimes means silence. That sometimes you win by not reacting, even when every part of you is screaming too. When I went to bring out dessert, my reflection caught in the glass cabinet. My eyes looked different, not weak, not broken, but calm in a way that scared even me. There was something quiet, something determined. I realized I didn't need to shout to defend myself. The moment she called me a failed wife, she showed everyone what kind of person she truly was. I didn't need to prove anything. Life has its way of making truth louder than words. I carried the tray of dessert out, my hands steady this time, and placed it in front of everyone. She looked at me, waiting for me to crumble, to respond, to justify myself. But I didn't give her that. I smiled politely, offered her a slice of cake, and said softly, "I made your favorite flavor." Her smile faltered for just a second. That was enough for me. The room slowly returned to life, people chatting again, pretending nothing had happened. But I could still feel the undercurrent, the unease that hung heavy in the air. Every time someone laughed, it felt forced, as if everyone was trying too hard to move past the discomfort. My husband finally placed his hand over mine under the table, a silent apology, but it felt too late. The damage was already done. I didn't pull away, but I didn't hold his hand back either. I was too tired, too hurt, too focused on keeping myself composed. When the evening began to wind down, I moved through the motions of saying goodbye, thanking guests, collecting dishes. Each smile felt mechanical, each word rehearsed. Inside, I was breaking, but on the outside, I looked calm, graceful even. I had learned long ago that silence can be more powerful than shouting, that dignity can be its own kind of revenge. Still, behind my composed face, a storm was brewing. Not one of anger, but of quiet strength, the kind that waits, the kind that knows time will reveal everything. As the last guest left, I caught her watching me again from across the room, that same smug expression plastered on her face. But this time, I met her eyes and didn't look away. I didn't need to. I had already decided I wouldn't let her words define me. I wouldn't fight her in front of others, because some people destroy themselves just by being who they are. I turned away, took a deep breath, and began clearing the table in silence. My heart still hurt, but underneath that pain, something else had begun to grow, a quiet, powerful calm. The kind that comes when you stop begging for respect and start earning it through patience, through grace, through the kind of strength that doesn't need an audience. Just when the night seemed to have reached its lowest point, when the heaviness in my chest felt almost unbearable, the sound of the door opening caught everyone's attention. Heads turned toward the entrance, and in walked a man in a dark suit, tall and confident, his presence immediately commanding the room. My mother-in-law's expression shifted instantly. The smugness on her face melted into surprise, almost fear. I didn't recognize him at first, but the way everyone reacted told me he was someone important. She stood up quickly, smoothing her dress, her voice suddenly filled with warmth and excitement as she greeted him. "Oh, Mr. Daniels," she said, her tone dripping with respect. "What a pleasant surprise." He smiled politely, but didn't return her warmth. Instead, his eyes scanned the room, his expression unreadable, almost distant. My husband got up to shake his hand, and my mother-in-law rushed to introduce everyone, speaking faster than usual, trying to sound composed. "This is my son," she said proudly, "and this is his wife," she added, glancing at me quickly, the tone in her voice suddenly different, polite, but hollow. For someone who had just called me a failed wife, her sudden change in tone was almost laughable. I stayed quiet, offering a gentle smile, though inside, I was curious about who he was and why she seemed so nervous. Mr. Daniels nodded slightly, acknowledging the introductions before taking a seat. It didn't take long for me to realize he was her boss, the one she often bragged about at family gatherings. She'd tell stories of how indispensable she was at work, how much he respected her, how he valued her opinions. Seeing her now, flustered and fidgety in his presence, told a different story. The energy in the room shifted. The same woman who had humiliated me minutes ago now looked small, uneasy, and desperate to impress. She laughed too loudly, spoke too quickly, filling the silence with meaningless chatter. I watched quietly from my seat, my emotions still raw from earlier, but a strange calm had settled over me. There was something poetic about it, the way fate had walked through the door without warning. I didn't know what was coming, but something told me this evening wasn't done teaching lessons. My mother-in-law kept talking about how she had organized the dinner, how she had helped with the arrangements. Her words twisted the truth, taking credit for things she hadn't done. I could see her boss's expression tighten slightly, as if he was listening but not believing. He asked her questions, simple, casual ones, but with each answer, she stumbled more. It was subtle, but her confidence was cracking. At one point, he looked at the decorations, at the food, and smiled faintly. "This is a lovely setup," he said. "Did you plan all this yourself?" Her eyes flickered toward me for a split second before she replied, "Yes, of course. I always take care of family events. I like to make sure everything is perfect." Her voice shook slightly, but she forced a smile. My heart ached a little, not from sympathy, but from disbelief at how far she'd go to keep up her image. I didn't say a word. I simply continued refilling glasses, quiet but observant. Then something unexpected happened. Her boss turned toward me. "You must be her daughter-in-law," he said kindly. "This dinner is impressive. Everything looks wonderful." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Everyone's eyes turned toward me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I smiled softly and said, "Thank you, sir. I just wanted it to be a special night for my husband." I didn't need to say anything else. My tone was calm, respectful, but honest. He nodded, looking back at my mother-in-law, his brow furrowing slightly, as if something clicked in his mind. The air grew tense. She laughed nervously, trying to change the subject, but it was too late. He had already seen enough. He asked a few more questions about work, and with each one, she grew more defensive. Her mask was slipping, and everyone in the room could feel it. The same woman who had stood tall earlier, belittling me without mercy, was now shrinking under the weight of her own lies. I watched quietly, feeling no need to interfere. Life was doing what it does best, balancing the scales. The conversation turned to integrity, honesty, and professionalism. Mr. Daniels spoke in a calm, measured tone, but his words carried a sharp edge. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "how we treat people when no one's watching says a lot about who we are." She smiled stiffly, nodding too quickly, but the color had drained from her face. Everyone else stayed silent, sensing the shift. I could see her hands trembling slightly, her composure slipping more with every passing second. It was strange how quickly the power in the room had changed hands. A few minutes ago, she had been the center of attention, confident and cruel. Now she sat stiffly, her eyes darting nervously toward her boss, her arrogance replaced with fear. I didn't gloat, I didn't smirk. I simply watched, knowing that some truths reveal themselves without anyone needing to lift a finger. What she had thrown at me with pride was now circling back toward her, quietly, precisely, inevitably. The tension in the room grew thicker with every passing second. My mother-in-law's face was still frozen in that uneasy smile, but her eyes betrayed her fear. Mr. Daniels had gone quiet, studying her carefully, his polite demeanor slowly fading into something colder, sharper. The guests sensed it too, the way his questions had changed tone, the way he was no longer simply making conversation. He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, his gaze shifting between her and me as if piecing together a puzzle she didn't want him to solve. My mother-in-law kept talking, her voice shaky now, trying to redirect the conversation, but her words tumbled over each other. The once confident woman who had stood tall and called me a failure now looked like someone waiting for the floor to open beneath her feet. Then he spoke again, his voice calm but deliberate. "You know, Mrs. Miller," he said, using her name in that formal, distant way that made her flinch, "I've heard many people praise this evening. But I'm curious, why did your daughter-in-law hesitate to take any credit? Because from what I can see, she's the one making sure everyone feels comfortable, and she seems to be doing a fine job of it." The air went completely still. Every eye turned toward her. She forced a laugh that came out too high-pitched, waving her hand as if brushing off the question. "Oh, you know how young wives are," she said, her tone falsely cheerful. "They do little things here and there, but the main planning always comes down to experience." He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. Instead, he turned his attention back to me. "Is that true?" he asked gently. "Did you only handle the little things?" His question wasn't meant to trap me. It felt more like he already knew the answer but wanted to give me the chance to speak. My throat tightened, but I stayed composed. "Sir," I said softly, "I just wanted to make this night special for my husband. That's all that mattered to me." I didn't say she hadn't helped. I didn't mention her insults or her lies. I simply spoke with calm honesty. And somehow, that truth cut deeper than anything else could have. Mr. Daniels nodded, his gaze resting on me for a moment before turning back to her. "That's interesting," he said quietly. "Because humility is a rare quality these days. Especially when some people spend so much energy trying to claim credit that doesn't belong to them." The room went silent again, and I saw it, that flicker of panic in her eyes. She tried to recover, smiling nervously, stammering something about teamwork and family, but it was too late. The mask had fallen. He leaned forward slightly, his tone now firm. "You've often spoken about integrity at work," he said. "How you value honesty, how you expect others to be transparent. I believe that about you. But tonight, I see something different. I see a woman who can't even acknowledge the efforts of someone standing right beside her." His words weren't loud, but they carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the room feel them. My husband shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, while my mother-in-law's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass of water. She tried to smile again, but it looked forced, her lips twitching. Mr. Daniels didn't stop there. "If this is how you treat people in your family," he said, "I can only imagine how you treat those beneath you at work." His words struck like lightning, not shouted, but sharp enough to echo in everyone's mind. She froze completely this time, her hand still midair, her knuckles white around the glass. The same guests who had laughed along with her earlier were now silent, their eyes darting between the two of them. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The color drained from her face. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the authority she had wrapped herself in for years. He continued, his voice steady, measured, but undeniably final. Leadership isn't about power, he said. It's about respect. And respect can't be demanded, it's earned by how you treat others, especially when you think no one important is watching. Those words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Everyone knew he wasn't just speaking about the party anymore. He was talking about her, about the way she lived, the way she treated people, the arrogance that had finally caught up to her. For the first time that evening, she didn't have an answer. She sat there, eyes downcast, lips trembling slightly. The proud, loud woman who had humiliated me moments before was now silent. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pretending to check their phones, others sipping their drinks, not daring to make eye contact. Mr. Daniels stood up slowly, straightening his jacket, and said calmly, "I think I've seen enough." The quiet that followed was suffocating. Even the faint background music seemed to stop, leaving only the sound of her shallow breathing and the weight of her own actions pressing down on her. She tried to say something, to explain, to regain even a shred of dignity, but the words died on her tongue. He didn't wait for her excuses. He simply gave a polite nod toward my husband, then looked at me with a faint, reassuring smile, the kind that said more than words could. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt seen. Fate had spoken for me in a way I never could. The silence that followed his words was deafening. No one dared to speak or even move. My mother-in-law sat there frozen, her face pale, her pride stripped away layer by layer. The same lips that had spat cruel words just an hour ago now trembled, searching for something to say but finding nothing. The power she once held over the room was gone, replaced by an uneasy stillness that wrapped around everyone like a heavy fog. Mr. Daniels remained standing, calm and composed, but his presence carried the weight of authority that no one could ignore. He looked at her one last time, his eyes filled not with anger but disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper because it comes from truth. He took a step closer, lowering his voice just enough for everyone to hear, but soft enough to maintain dignity. "I've always believed that how someone behaves outside the office tells you who they really are," he said. "You've represented this company at family events, charity dinners, community gatherings. You've spoken about integrity and leadership countless times. But tonight, I've seen a different side of you, one I can't respect." Her eyes widened, the realization dawning on her that this wasn't just an awkward dinner anymore. This was her downfall unfolding in real time, right in front of the people she'd tried to impress. She stammered, "Sir, I think you've misunderstood. It was all in good humor. Just a family joke." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, her words desperate and trembling. But he didn't waver. "Humor," he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Belittling your own family in public isn't humor, it's humiliation. And doing it to someone who's shown nothing but grace speaks volumes about your character." She swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the table, searching for someone to defend her, but no one did. Even her closest friends avoided her gaze, pretending to be occupied with their drinks, silently distancing themselves from her collapse. Mr. Daniels sighed softly, his tone weary but resolute. "I've always valued you as an employee," he said, "but I can't have someone representing our company who lacks empathy and respect. You've embarrassed yourself, not just as a colleague, but as a person." Her lips parted as if to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her face turned red, her hands trembling as she clutched her napkin. For once, she wasn't in control. The tables had turned completely, and now the weight of her own arrogance pressed down harder than she could bear. The rest of the room sat in stunned silence. My husband's face was pale, his eyes darting between his mother and Mr. Daniels, unsure of what to do. He opened his mouth as if to intervene but stopped, realizing that anything he said now would only make things worse. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my heart beating steadily. I didn't feel anger anymore, just an odd sense of peace, the kind that comes when truth finally takes its rightful place. I didn't want revenge. I didn't need it. The moment spoke for itself. Mr. Daniels turned slightly toward me, his expression softening. "You've handled yourself with remarkable grace," he said quietly. "Not many people could stay this composed after what happened earlier. His words weren't loud, but they carried warmth, sincerity, and a kind of quiet acknowledgement that made my chest tighten. I didn't respond, only nodded slightly, afraid that if I spoke, my voice might break. He gave a small smile before turning back to her. "Take this as a lesson," he said, his tone final. "Titles and positions mean nothing if you can't respect the people around you. I'll expect your resignation letter first thing in the morning." Her mouth fell open, her breath catching in disbelief. The color drained from her face completely. "You can't be serious," she whispered. But he didn't respond. He didn't need to. His decision was already made. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, gave a polite nod to my husband, and began walking toward the door. The sound of his footsteps echoed across the room like the ticking of a clock marking the end of her pride. The door closed behind him, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had turned solid. No one spoke. No one dared. My mother-in-law sat perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes unfocused. She looked like a woman who had built her world out of pride and watched it crumble in a single evening. My husband looked down, shame and confusion written all over his face. The guests shifted uncomfortably, murmuring soft goodbyes as they began to leave, eager to escape the awkwardness that lingered like smoke. I quietly stood up, gathering plates and glasses, moving slowly but deliberately, giving her space to process the weight of what had just happened. She didn't look at me. Not once. The woman who had always found ways to belittle me, to make me feel small, couldn't even meet my eyes now. There was no need for words. Her silence said everything. As I placed the last plate in the sink, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window, small, fragile, nothing like the woman she pretended to be. For the first time, she wasn't the powerful mother-in-law who controlled every conversation. She was just a person, broken by the consequences of her own cruelty. And I realized then that sometimes, the loudest revenge doesn't come from shouting or fighting back. It comes from letting life speak for you, quietly, gracefully, and undeniably. The house felt strangely quiet after everyone left. The laughter, the chatter, the music, all of it had vanished, leaving behind only the faint ticking of the clock and the echo of what had just happened. The candles had burned low, their wax dripping slowly onto the tablecloth, and the air carried a heaviness that couldn't be described. My husband stood near the kitchen doorway, staring at nothing, his expression torn between disbelief and guilt. I could tell he didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to comfort me, and part of him wanted to process what his mother had just lost. But I didn't need words. I didn't need anyone to explain or apologize. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, not by me, but by life itself. I began cleaning the table, moving quietly, collecting plates, folding napkins, wiping away the last traces of the night. Every small movement felt like a way to release the tension that still lingered in my body. My mother-in-law was still sitting in the same chair, her posture slumped, her eyes staring blankly ahead. She hadn't said a single word since Mr. Daniels left. Her pride, once sharp enough to cut through anyone who challenged her, was gone now, replaced by silence, guilt, and disbelief. She looked smaller somehow, almost fragile, like a woman who had finally seen her own reflection and didn't recognize it anymore. For years, she had looked at me with nothing but criticism, comparing me to others, judging every choice I made. I had tried to please her, to earn her approval, to show her that I wasn't the failure she believed I was. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Every gesture was met with disapproval, every kindness overlooked, every effort dismissed. Yet tonight, for the first time, she had been forced to see me, not as a failure, not as her target, but as a person who had stood silently while her own arrogance brought her down. It wasn't revenge I felt in that moment. It was closure. I poured her a glass of water and placed it gently in front of her. She didn't look up, just nodded faintly, her hands trembling as she wrapped her fingers around the glass. For a long time, there was only silence between us. No anger, no confrontation, just two women sitting on opposite sides of a truth that had finally come to light. I could have said something. I could have reminded her of her words, of the humiliation, of the pain she'd caused. but I didn't. I didn't need to. She already knew. And that realization was far more powerful than anything I could have said. My husband finally spoke, his voice low, uncertain. "I didn't expect that to happen," he said quietly. He's never spoken to her like that before. I didn't respond right away. I just kept wiping the table, each slow motion grounding me, helping me release the weight of everything that had happened. "It's okay," I said finally, my tone calm, almost gentle. "Maybe it needed to happen." He didn't reply. He just stood there, guilt clouding his eyes, perhaps realizing that his silence earlier had cost more than he understood. My mother-in-law shifted slightly, her voice barely a whisper when she finally spoke. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," she said, her tone fragile, stripped of its usual superiority. Her words hung in the air, heavy but sincere. I looked at her for a long moment. For the first time, she wasn't speaking from pride, she was speaking from regret. And even though the hurt inside me still lingered, I felt no anger toward her. I simply nodded and said softly, "Sometimes we only see ourselves when life holds up a mirror." She looked at me then, her eyes glistening, and I saw something I had never seen before: humility. The night stretched on quietly after that. I finished cleaning, the soft clinking of dishes filling the silence, while she sat lost in thought. I could sense the storm of emotions inside her: shame, confusion, sorrow, all crashing together. Yet beneath it, there was something else too: understanding. The kind that only comes when the truth hits hard enough to shatter pride. As I turned off the lights one by one, the house dimmed into a calm stillness. The glow from the last candle flickered weakly before going out, leaving only the faint reflection of the moonlight through the window. My husband went upstairs, but I stayed behind for a moment, staring at the empty dining table where it had all unfolded. Every insult, every humiliation, every cruel word that had once made me doubt myself, they no longer had power over me. Life had spoken on my behalf, not through revenge, but through balance. When I finally turned to leave the room, I heard her voice again, quiet and hesitant. "I'm sorry." Just 2 words, barely audible, but they carried the weight of everything she had never said before. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see her face. I simply closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the sound of her apology sink in. It wasn't about victory or defeat anymore. It was about release, about finding peace not by fighting, but by standing still and letting truth do what it does best. The night that had begun with humiliation had ended in quiet redemption. The woman who once called me a failed wife had been humbled not by me, but by her own actions, and in her silence, I found the justice I had been waiting for.